couple of minutes before we start today's session.
Welcome, everyone. I can see people popping in.
If you like, while we're waiting, I just invite you to let us know where you're joining from today in the chat window. I'm over in the north of the city in Northcote. And if you did have any special questions about seeds that you're curious about, things that you want to learn from today's session, also feel free to put them in there and I can tell you whether or not we'll cover them or if we won't cover them today or anything else that I need to know so I can make the session more relevant for you. Hello to Darrell, who's over in Cranbourne, and Fran, who's joining from Berwick. It's great to have you here. And it's great to see Helen from Sassafras and Tia is on Winnowing country joining. And Robin in Croydon. We're really spread all the way around the city today. And I'm wondering if anyone's saved any seeds already this season. Let me know. Have you got those tomato seeds dealt with? Have you got bean seeds in? What are you saving seeds from?
How are we looking on participants? I'm showing 15 here, and I think we had around 30 registered. So I wonder, do we want to wait a minute or two more to get started?
That's absolutely up to you, Tia. I'm happy to start whenever and have a few extras join us. It's up to you.
Okay, well, I know we've got a lot to cover and we're very excited to get the session started. So welcome everyone to Seed Saving 101 with Kat Lavers. Thank you for coming today. My name is Tia and I'm a Health Promotion Officer at Enliven, Victoria. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement. Enliven, Victoria acknowledges the people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land and waterways where we learn and grow together. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm calling in from Boonwurrung country of the Kulin Nation. So just a couple of housekeeping items quickly. I welcome you all to write in the chat, if you haven't already, the traditional owners of the lands you're calling in from today. And just to let you know, this session is being recorded. You should have got a message stating that when you joined. If you feel more comfortable, feel free to turn your camera off. Kat has said that she does love seeing people's faces. So if you are comfortable with it, with having your camera on, that would be fantastic as well. If you've got questions along the way, please feel free to pop them into the chat. And there will be some time for Kat to answer them. She's also very good at scanning the chat, so should be able to give some timely answers while we're going. So also, you may not be aware that you can change the name that is displayed, and to do that, to change your name, open the participants window, find your name, click more, and then choose the rename option. So you can feel free to do that as well with any privacy concerns. So for some background, today's webinar is brought to you by Enliven Victoria and our Food from Home initiative. We'd like to give some special thanks to the City of Casey for their funding support for today's webinar. We'd also like to thank Casey Cardinia Libraries, who are currently streaming this webinar at the Endeavour Hills, Hampton Park, and Pakenham branches. So welcome to everyone at the libraries. Enliven Victoria is a not-for-profit that works across Melbourne's southeast to improve community-level health and social well-being. As part of Enliven's work, we have a community-based social marketing campaign called Food from Home, which aims to promote the health and climate co-benefits of edible gardening. We do this through several activities, such as readily available resources and events like this one today. Food from Home has the vision of a resilient, healthy, and food-secure future for all households and communities in Melbourne's southeast. To find out more, we have a website, Instagram, and Facebook page, and you can find those listed on the screen. So we're excited to announce we've recently launched 2 seed libraries at Endeavour Hills and Barrett Community Gardens. These are the first seed libraries for the city of Casey, and we're thrilled to have everyone here today to learn more about seed saving and hopefully get involved with saving and sharing seeds at these new seed libraries. Stay tuned to your emails after the webinar, and we'll be sending across some information about how you can access the free community seed libraries. So I'm now excited to introduce our presenter today, Kat Lavers. Kat Lavers is a passionate gardener and sustainable food systems advocate. With a background in permaculture design and teaching, her work reconnects people with the land under their feet and helps them experience the abundance of growing food as well as their role in wider ecosystems. Today, Kat will take us through the basics of seed saving. So without further delay, I'll pass it over to you, Kat.
Thank you so much, Tia. Welcome, everyone. It's exciting to be here with you. I also want to mention that I'm joining from Wurundjeri land today between the Merry, which means the Rocky Creek, the very Rocky Creek, and the Darebin Creek, which is named after the welcome swallow, which migrates down over the warmer months. So I want to also acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders past, present, also to the younger people who are stepping into those roles today. I think it's incredible that we live on land alongside the oldest living culture on earth, which also means the oldest living food culture. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been living alongside and stewarding and building relationships with plants for 60,000 years. And it's just mind-boggling to think of that heritage. And obviously a lot has been lost since colonisation. So as Tia said in the introduction, one little contribution that I like to try and make is to help us save seeds and help us reconnect to land and to plants. But I'm also conscious that without listening and learning from and supporting the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we won't solve the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis that we're in. So I'd like to preface the things that I say by mentioning that and encourage you to just reconnect and connect with some of the struggles that they are facing and try and support. Me and seeds. So I'm an extremely excitable home gardener. I'm producing most of the fresh produce that my household eats, except for big bulk crops like potatoes, onions, pumpkins, and sourcing tomatoes. But most of the other fresh produce that I grow comes from my home garden year round. And of course, saving seeds is quite a big part of that, and ensuring that you have great crops and healthy crops. So today's session, I've got a couple of goals. One of the goals is to give you the least technical understanding that I can of what is happening when we save seeds. And that will hopefully help to explain why things sometimes go right and sometimes go wrong. I also want to show you a couple of really simple techniques that you can apply across lots and lots of different plants. And most importantly, I'd like you to feel confident to have a go when we finish today's session. So they're my goals for today. I hope they sound good. And I'm going to start sharing some photos and videos with you now. And I will just say, I'd love your questions throughout the session. I don't really want to lecture you for an hour. I'd love to have a little bit of dialogue and just answer some questions as we go through. So what I want to encourage is for you to use the chat window to pop any questions you like as we're going. If they're on topic, I'll try and cover them while I'm on a section. And if they are something that's a little bit off and unrelated, we'll come to it at the end of the session, but certainly don't hold back. And I also know that there are some experienced seed savers who have joined us today as well. So I want to encourage you to share your opinions and your techniques and your ideas, and also disagree with me. If you try something that you do and you think that way works better, then please let me know so I can learn from that as well today. So I hope that sounds worthwhile. I'm going to launch straight in by just introducing you to seeds. And I've probably walked past thousands of dandelions before I really thought about them and their seeds and their strategy. And this is just one example of a plant that's created amazing ways to distribute its seeds by giving them all like little wings or parachutes or some sort of aerodynamic ability. And the more that I think about seeds and read about them and learn about them, the more exciting they become. So we have some seeds which are brightly coloured, and they're designed to attract attention so that something will eat them. And some of them even wrap their seeds in delicious, tasty bundles, otherwise known as fruits, so that people like us or other animals are enticed to eat them. And we will digest them and hopefully transport them some distance and pop them out with a tasty or a nutritious package of fertilizer ready for the next plant to use. And then we have seeds that take the opposite tract, that will be small and brown, and they'll scatter on the ground and be camouflaged so that they don't get eaten, because that's not what they want. We have some seeds, particularly seeds in Australia, that need to be burnt or smoked, and they won't germinate until a bushfire has gone through. And that signal is cueing them into growing when the canopy has opened up, so when they have light to photosynthesize, and when there is a bed of ash on the soil. Ash is very rich in nutrients, so it's a great technique for them. And there's other seeds which have a chemical coating, and they won't germinate until the rain has washed it off, so they won't accidentally germinate in the middle of a drought. So every seed has its own strategy. They're many and they're varied, and it's quite exciting just to think about how this seed might have evolved so that it can survive and thrive. Now, if we were face to face, one of the things that I sometimes do is give everybody in the room a big bean seed that has been soaked overnight in water. So I'd like you to all imagine that you've just delicately split the two halves apart. And if you had, then this is what you would see. And now if you look closely at this bean, hopefully, I'll outline it with my mouse. Hopefully what you'll see is that it's got the very beginnings of a root here, but also quite excitingly, you can see maybe a couple of the first true leaves of this baby plant. And that's inside every seed, but sometimes we can't see it because they're too small. And somebody once described to me a seed as a baby plant asleep with its lunch. And I could not think of a more perfect description. And this is really relevant for us as seed savers, because it reminds us that even though they look kind of dead, they look inert, seeds are alive, and we need to treat them as such if they are going to remain strong and ready to grow for us in the garden. So just to highlight that, here's a diagram just so you can see that more clearly. So the baby plant is, of course, this embryo that I highlighted for you. And then we also have the lunch, which is the store of food in the bean, which could be our lunch, but if we don't eat it ourselves, then it is actually lunch for the emerging plant. And this is a store of food which is there until the root system can grow and until the plant's leaves or solar panels can put themselves up above the surface and start to generate their own energy. So if you were to plant this bean, don't worry about all these complicated names, but I just wanted you to see what will actually happen to that root and what will happen to the halves of the seed that are the food stores. And then eventually we get what we call the true leaves, or the leaves that start to look like bean leaves emerging. So a seed is a baby embryonic plant currently dormant. Now, why do we save seeds? I encourage you to, at this stage, put some reasons in the chat window. What's your motivation for being here today? What encourages you to save your own seeds? And the first one that I've got is just so you have lots of them and so you have surplus to share. And so have a look at this packet of dill seeds, for example, and imagine how many seeds fit in there. And then have a look at 1 year's worth of dill seed saving at my place. And it's pretty clear that you'll never be able to grow that many dill seeds before those seeds expire. So of course you're going to generate surplus, or you're going to have some spices for the kitchen. And I do use dill seeds. I also use chili seeds, coriander seeds, and a few others as well. So there's certainly a cost imperative, but also you'll just have lots to share with your neighbourhood. Also, another reason is that you'll have stronger seeds, and crucially, over time, they will become more adapted to your particular microclimate and soil type and management technique in your garden. And all of that results in a better crop. And just to really highlight this point, on the left here, I've got some weak seed, and then on the right, I've got strong seed. And they were planted at the same time. Just so important to know that, like, if you don't start with strong seed, your chances of getting a good crop are really, really slim. So for me, seed saving has just become such a core part of what I do, because I know that I'm just going to get disappointing results if I don't start with the strong seed. And Melanie's just shared to save seeds to make growing food more cost effective and also grow with more successful plants. So yeah, right on there, Melanie, right with you. But there's also some flavour and some variety things. So if anyone, most people, when you start gardening, you grow tomatoes and you learn very quickly that you don't pick them when they're green and you don't throw them into the back of a ute if you want to have good tasting tomatoes. And yet this is how most commercial tomatoes are harvested. And so the sacrifice there is flavour. And there's only some varieties that will handle this, and often they're not the beautiful ones that have the best flavour and texture for us at home. So as home gardeners, we have access to thousands of heirloom varieties. They may not always look perfect, but they taste incredible. And it's interesting to note that the actual wild tomato, the very first tomatoes, were about 1 centimetre across and yellow. So this is an example here in the centre. They grow in the Galapagos Islands, where the wildlife like to forage for them. And from this tiny yellow tomato, all these thousands of tomato varieties have been bred. Yes, by farmers, small farmers particularly, but also by home gardeners like you and I, just by selecting the ones that were a little bit bigger, a little bit redder, just developing out any mutations that happened in nature into all this incredible diversity. And Tia has also shared that she likes to share stories of how they've grown among her family and friends. So there's a heritage value here as well. And I wanted to extend that by talking about agricultural biodiversity. So we do talk a lot about Indigenous biodiversity, our flora and fauna, but there's another type of biodiversity that's quite significant, which is our food plants. And of course, there is a bit of overlap as well with Indigenous food plants. But agricultural diversity is so important to sustaining our lives. And there's lots of examples. I've got just one on the screen here for you. This is a dryland seed bank in Syria. And so they were growing crops like chickpeas, fava beans, wheat varieties, things that they collected from all across the Middle East, and thousands of local varieties that they were holding and safeguarding as a library. And these sorts of seed banks are so significant because as our climates change, we are going to need new varieties, and the genetic diversity for them is going to come from these local seed banks. And the people running the seed bank understand the importance of their work. And so when war broke out in Syria, they actually stayed behind at the seed bank and ensured that all of these seeds made it out across the border to safety. And there are stories about people who have starved to death surrounded by seeds in a war situation in a seed bank because they understood the significance of what they were doing for future generations. So we can contribute to this effort by saving seeds at home, and shouldn't underestimate how important it is for local communities and home gardeners to be contributing to this heritage. That's really where it's come from, and it's what's going to sustain us in the future as well. A quick note here about some things that we don't usually grow from seed. They can grow from seed, and a lot of breeders will be growing them from seed to develop new varieties. But I just wanted to put in a quick note around the things that you usually won't plant from seed for any new gardeners out there. Okay, so with that background in mind, what we'll do now is look at a little bit of seed terminology. This is as light as I can make it, but there are just some words here that I need to explain. And you can still save great seeds without understanding this, so don't worry if it doesn't all kind of click for you first time round. Firstly, I need to mention hybrid seeds, and these are a cross between two varieties of the same species, and they have characteristics from each. So for example, we might have a tomato that is like the one you saw before. It's like a brick that can withstand being thrown into the back of a ute and picked underripe. And we might have a beautiful, shiny, glossy globe of a tomato. And if we cross them together, we can produce hybrid seeds that are beautiful bricks. And a lot of examples of that very scenario. So hybrid seeds are quite dominant now in commercial agriculture. They have that plus of having desirable characteristics, but unfortunately, they are not genetically stable. So what that means is that if we are to save seeds from them at home, we can plant them, but we actually won't necessarily get things that look like them in the next generation. We could get either of the parents, we could get something that looks like the hybrid that we wanted, or we could get something else that's completely different. So they're genetically unstable. Future generations won't necessarily resemble their parents, and also we have to buy them, and they're usually expensive because of the breeding work that's gone in. So the opposite of a hybrid seed is an open pollinated seed, and these are that they would have started as a cross, as a hybrid, but just by replanting gradually and selecting over time, they have been genetically stabilized. So that means that they can produce true to type, which is a bit of a jargon term, true to type future generations that will look and taste like the parents, as long as they don't get crossed themselves. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So open pollinated seeds is where I'd like to encourage you as home gardeners. So mostly trying to support open pollinated seeds so that we have the resilience of being able to save our own seeds with reliable results. But it's fine to grow some hybrids and to also just experiment with saving seed and seeing what comes up. I also just need to mention genetically modified seeds, which obviously they're very controversial, but they're really different from hybrid seeds. This is where we have genes from other plant or animal species that have been inserted by scientists in a lab. And they're not usually available to home gardeners in Australia. But at this stage, I just want you to know that that's a different thing to hybrid seeds. Of course, we have heirloom seeds. It's a bit of a rubbery term, but as we know, heirlooms are things that are old, they're locally very valuable, and they've been passed down between a few generations. So if you've got a seed that's been passed down between a couple of generations of gardeners or farmers, we could call it an heirloom seed, but there's no kind of legal requirements around that. They're always open pollinated and they're never patented. And finally, we've got organic seeds. So all these terms can get quite confusing. Organic seeds really talk about how has the seed been grown and produced. And organic seeds will have met certain standards around soil health, and they won't have been grown with any synthetic chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides. So we could have hybrid seeds that are grown under organic circumstances, for example. Okay, then we'll move on to pollination. Of course, we need to know something about what's happening with pollination to understand what's happening with our seeds. And very simply, we need pollen to move from the male parts of a flower to the female parts. And sometimes we can have them on the same flower. Sometimes we can have them on separate flowers on the same plant. And sometimes we can have separate male or female plants. So that is something that it's good to know about whatever species you are looking up So for example, zucchinis will have male and female flowers on the same plant. Kiwi fruit, you need a separate male plant and a female plant. That's the same for asparagus, and I think the same for spinach as well. And that pollen transfer can happen as through an insect, like this bee, as you can see up here, that's just been rolling around in pollen from a zucchini. They have to comb themselves back and tuck it into their little pannier baskets on their back legs, as you can see here. But there's lots of other creatures that do pollination for us. So you could list some if you know in the chat. Things like flies actually are quite significant pollinators. We have native bees that are great pollinators. Fruit bats, like flying foxes, are significant for pollinating forests in Australia. And you might accidentally do pollination as you're moving around the garden, who knows, or deliberately with a paintbrush. Now, if we're wandering around the garden, so wind is also another significant pollinator, just blowing pollen around. And if you were wondering, is it a wind or insect pollinated plant? You can just have a look at the flowers or the lack thereof in some cases. So if you have a look down here, this is a brachycomb native daisy. And so that one is going to be insect pollinated, because no plant puts the effort into something this beautiful without some sort of reward, and the wind cannot see how pretty your flowers are. Over here we've got a corn plant, and corn is a grass, and the grass family are wind pollinated, and you can see it just doesn't have very showy flowers at all. So yeah, that's the way that you tell. And I can see Helen's put a note that she's been pollinating eggplants with her finger. That's fantastic, Helen. And I've got a paintbrush that I use sometimes to make sure pollination happens. Okay, the final terms I just need to talk you through quickly are self-pollinating plants. And so these actually can pollinate themselves. So usually they have what we call complete flowers that have both male and female parts, and it's on the same plant. And sometimes, like in the case of tomatoes and beans, they are actually pollinated before they even open the flower. So it's all very incestuous, all very inbreeding. And what it means is that these sorts of plants can keep their gene pool diverse enough with only a very, very small number of individuals, or even one plant in some circumstances. So that's really helpful for people in small gardens. The opposite of this is a cross-pollinating plant, where they require either wind or insects or other creatures to transfer pollen between plants. And we call these ones outbreeding. And they must have that cross-pollination, otherwise their genetic diversity declines over time, and also the vigour and the health of the plants will decline over time as well. So we can't save seed reliably over many generations from a small number of plants, or we start to lose certain characteristics, or the plants just eventually become quite weak. Darrell, I can see your question. Hopefully we can get to that, and I can talk you through pumpkins a bit later on. Now, so what does this mean? So how many plants should I save seed from to maintain that vigour and that genetic diversity? So here's some examples for you. If you're a commercial seed producer, what they recommend is that at least 10 bean plants should flower together in order to maintain their gene pool. And they say about 200 corn plants. So I have read 50, but I've also read 200 in other books. So yeah, this is a lot, and difficult, of course, for home gardeners. And we don't necessarily have to follow these recommendations, but it's just good to know that they exist, because if you start to see the vigour dropping off, then it can explain what's happening for you at home. The other thing that we might think about is, do we want to control the pollination of our plants? Because plants of the same species can cross-pollinate, and each species can have lots of different varieties within them. So we might have two types of pumpkins that can cross together. There's about 3 species of pumpkin, and within each of those species, any of those pumpkins can cross. So a friend recently had a golden nugget pumpkin and a butternut pumpkin, and they crossed together and they made what we're going to call butternug pumpkins because they were the same species. So does it matter? Well, no, not really. But if you wanted to maintain a butternut seed and a golden nugget seed, then of course we need to prevent that mixing. So commercially, they would grow them a very long way apart so that bees wouldn't actually move from one to the other. That's pretty useless in an urban environment where you've got neighbours growing pumpkins. Or commercially, they might only grow one variety at a time and only allow one to flower at a time. That also doesn't really work when you've got lots of pumpkins across your neighbourhood. So on a home garden scale, if we want to control pollination, we can bag up or tape the flowers, or sometimes we can cage the entire plant. But the problem here is we're excluding insects, and that means we have to be an insect. So this is where, like Helen, you get out with your finger and just poke it in different flowers and pollinate, or you grab a paintbrush and do the same thing. And Darrell, that's essentially how you pollinate pumpkins. And if I get enough time, I can show you a bit more detail later on. So yeah, remember you might need to hand pollinate if you are controlling pollination. But also remember that controlling pollination is optional. And if all you want is something to eat, then it probably doesn't matter. But what I do want to say to you is that if you are given a very rare variety, and you are trying to steward it and keep it going over time, then yes, these recommendations are really important. But otherwise, for everyone else, don't let this put you off. I just want you to have this background so that you understand what's happening, and so you know why things might not be working out down the track if you haven't followed them. And just finally, before we move on to some techniques, I want to just hone in on what I call the power of selection. And there's this lovely quote that's paraphrased from a plant breeder, Carol Deppy, and she says there's no such thing as seed saving without plant breeding. So in other words, every time we choose which plants to save seed from, we're actually making decisions about what our future crops will be like. And that's actually a form of plant breeding. So you won't just be a seed saver, you'll also be graduating to a plant breeder. And what we want to make sure is that we're saving from our very best plants, however we define that. So we want to save from plants that are disease resistant, drought tolerant, that repel or resist pests, plants that have the best flavour, plants that are cropping early or cropping late or cropping for as long a period as possible, or cropping in a short window if we want to harvest them all at once for something like making tomato sauce. So whatever your desirable characteristics are, just be aware that you're needing to select for them over time. And what we don't want to do is leave seed saving until the very last point of the season and go out there and grab the worst mangled little shriveled tomatoes and think, oh, okay, yes, I've got them. Okay, that's good. I can relax now. Because what we're doing is actually selecting for smaller and weaker plants next year. So as you can see here, I just use a little bit of ribbon or a little bit of plastic tie, whatever I can find, to just mark the very best of each crop and make sure that I don't accidentally harvest that for the kitchen. And also sometimes if you had a really poor plant, you might do something called roguing, which is where you stop it from flowering so that pollen doesn't get mixed in with the rest of your plants. So just, in other words, cut off the flowers or pull out the plant or eat it or whatever you need to do. And the mantra here that I learned from my mum is you keep the best and you eat the rest. And so if you follow that mantra, then you'll have better and better seeds over time. So I've just raced through there. Let me know if there's any questions on any of those. I can't see any in the chat at this stage. So what I'm going to do now is actually go through a couple of plant families and look at little tricks and tips and the sorts of seed saving techniques that you can use for each one. And I'm going to start with the two easiest families for people getting started. And the first one I'm going to look at is the Fabaceae family, otherwise known as the bean family or the legume family. And this includes your beans, broad beans, peas, and snow peas. So this family is very easy, but there are a few little tricks. Firstly, when we pick beans to eat for the table, I'm just circling that with my mouse, we don't want them tough and stringy, we want them young and tender. But at this stage, the seeds actually haven't developed yet. So as with all seed saving, as you'll see the pattern as we move through, we need to wait until the seeds have matured before we harvest. So at this stage, no. What we're looking for is something a bit more like this down in the bottom left-hand corner. If we leave them until they're fully dry on the plant, then yes, of course, we know they're mature, that's great. If you leave them until the pods are very knobbly and until they bend really easily, that's also a good sign. And you can get away with slightly earlier than that if you're lucky, but you have to get a bit more experience to know when you've got them mature. So if you're unsure, just let them dry out on the plant for as long as you can. Now, yesterday we had some rain on the way, so I was actually rushing around the garden grabbing all my dried beans, because what can happen if they do get wet again from rain is they can start to sprout in the pod, which is what you can see in the middle at the bottom. And plants can't stop and start, so once they've sprouted, they won't ever sprout again. So this is bad news, and those seeds are not going to be viable anymore. So the caveat to that is that if you know heavy rain is coming, you need to go and harvest those dried beans, otherwise they might start to sprout or go mouldy on you. So once I've got them, I will indoors, I'll shell them and they'll stay in a basket like this. And I usually leave them lying around, adorning the kitchen table for about 3 or 4 weeks at room temperature in the shade. And so what they'll do is just naturally dry out. And I also, just as a side note, I love just running my fingers through these beautiful baskets of bean seeds. And that also just helps to make sure they're evenly drying and mix them around a little bit. And they could be good to go at this stage, but there's 2 other things that I could teach you about them. One of them is that in my garden, I have a pest called bean weevils. And bean weevils, you won't see them at this stage, but they will have laid eggs in the beans. And they can actually hatch out in the middle of winter and make little holes, and also move on to your pantry and the rest of your seed box. So what I do now for my beans is, when I'm sure that they're properly dried after a few weeks at room temperature, I'll seal them up nice and tight and I'll stick them in my freezer and freeze them for about 3 days. The seeds are unharmed, but it will kill the eggs inside them, so I won't get bean weevils hatching. So that's quite an important step. And it's also very important that you don't open that packet until they've come back to room temperature, because of course frozen beans will attract moisture and we don't want any of this sprouting or rotting happening. So just let them come back to room temperature and then they can go in your seed box and you should be right. And just finally, a note for all seeds really, but especially larger ones, when you harvest them, you'll get some that are beautiful, large, perfect, and you'll get some that are a bit small and shrunken and shriveled, and I grade them. In a small garden, that it's not worth planting seeds which are going to produce small and weak plants. So I am grading them and I'm only planting the ones that look really strong and healthy. So that's the bean family. There's not much to it. It's good to have those little tricks up your sleeve though. Next, I'm going to move on to the Solanaceae, or the tomato family, sometimes called solanums, including tomatoes, capsicums, chilies, eggplant, also tamarillos. Our native kangaroo apple plant is also in this category for those interested in Indigenous plants. And again, a very simple family. For vegetables that have got dry flesh, things like capsicums, chilies and eggplant, all you really need to do is let them fully mature. So you need the capsicums and chilies to turn red or turn yellow or orange or whatever colour they're going to be. The green ones are not yet ready. And you just want them to go a bit wrinkly, and I'm hoping you can see the wrinkles here on this capsicum. And what that's signalling is that it's really fully mature and that all of the energy has gone into those developing seeds. And at this stage, with those groups, you can just scrape the seeds out onto a plate, label it, of course, and just let them dry out again at room temperature for a couple of weeks, and then they can go into your seed box. In this family, sometimes we have plants that produce fruit with a kind of a gel around the seed, and tomatoes, hopefully you can picture that, a little kind of gel inside them. And so one way of dealing with them is to just spread out that tomato flesh onto some kitchen towel and let it dry. And you can see I've done that here in the bottom right hand corner. And this works really well. And my mum has been doing this for my entire life. So it's a really quick and simple technique. Just spread some tomato pulp onto paper and let it dry. And then when you want to plant the tomatoes, you just tear off a bit of the paper with the seed attached and plant it. And of course, the paper will break down and you can label them directly on the paper. But there is another way of saving tomato seeds, which actually gets rid of that jelly pulp and also treats the seeds so that it removes the chance of some diseases being transferred from one year to the next. And so actually to do that, what we do is ferment them. And again, we want these tomatoes to be really ripe. So you can see it's just getting a little bit of mold here and getting a bit wrinkly. That's perfect for seed saving. So what we could do if we want to ferment them is either leave the tomato to just go a bit sloppy on your bench, or you can scoop out that pulp into a glass and let it develop this mold on the surface. And believe it or not, that's what they do commercially. And then you'll find you're able to scrub them a little bit in a sieve, just agitate them against the sieve to clean them up really well under running water. And you'll even see the fine hairs on the tomato seed. So it really does clean them up very well. I will actually label them, as you can see, in the sieve and leave them in the sieve to dry because there's a really good airflow in the sieve. And I'll just sort of break them up a bit and move them around to make sure that they are drying properly over the first few days. And then, of course, leave them for a couple of weeks and then they can get tucked away in the seed box when they're fully dry. I hope this is making sense. Let me know if there's questions. Otherwise, I'll whip through a couple of other families. So I'm going to go through a couple quite quickly because they're really similar. Now, next we've got the beetroot family, Amaranthaceae. It's also got things like amaranth, silver beet, chard, spinach, quinoa. And with this family, you can have a look and just ask yourself, are they insect pollinated? Are they wind pollinated? And hopefully what you're seeing is they don't really have very showy flowers. So that's a cue that they're wind pollinated. Yep, nice one, Tia. So anyway, this is what their seeds look like. And the key thing with this group and the next few groups is we need to make sure that the seeds are fully mature before we harvest them. So in the top, you can see they're not fully sized yet and the stem is still quite green. A really good indication is the stem is starting to yellow. And when I pinch the seeds, which are these little corky capsules here, they've actually got seeds inside them. So this will be like 3 or 4 seeds in each one. But when I pinch them with my fingers, you should feel them. They shouldn't compress. They should feel a bit hard. And that will tell you, yep, that seed is sizing up nicely. So that's the stage where you could harvest them. Same with the Apiaceae family or the carrot family or the umbel family. Here I've got some parsley flowers and they're just starting to set seed. Here's one in the middle, which I could certainly harvest at this stage. You can see the yellow stem, you can see the seeds have really filled out. And then over here, this is a dill seed head, it's a different species. But yeah, these ones are definitely ready. And when you see a few seeds start to fall, then that's a really good indication as well. So that's the stage we would gather them. Next one is Asteraceae or lettuces. Daisy family includes lettuces, chicories, sunflower. Also yam daisy, which is one of our treasured native staple food plants, which is this flower here in the centre for anyone interested in growing native food plants. And dandelions also in this group, by the way, and maybe you can see a little bit of resemblance in the fluffy carrot seed here. So this is the stage where sorry, not carrot seed, lettuce seed. This is the stage that I would harvest them. And again, I'm pinching these little flowers and I can feel lettuce seeds have gone hard inside them. So that's my sign that yes, they're definitely ready. Participant question here, do you leave the tomato on the bush to be fully ripe? And yeah, so the answer is I try to, but tomatoes are one of the fruits that will continue to ripen after they're harvested once they're past a certain point of maturity. So if you do get maybe given, for example, a tomato from someone and it's at the eating stage, but you want to save seed, you can actually let the tomato mature just sitting on your kitchen bench until it gets soft, and then the seeds will actually continue to draw energy from the fruit and keep developing over time. So tomatoes, they don't have to necessarily stay on the bush. A lot of other things do though. So they'd probably be more of an exception to the rule. Okay, and finally, one more is the Amaryllidaceae, the onion family, or the alliums. And this is what they look like, the flowers here, and then they explode into these incredible globes of seeds when they're ready. I'm also going to talk about brassicas before we look at techniques here. And this is actually getting into the more difficult category for home gardeners to harvest seed from. And one of the reasons for that is that, in fact, all of these vegetables, as I do a bit of an arc with my mouse, they are actually all the same species. It's incredible, but it's true. So all of them have been gradually selected from Brassica oleracea, which is a common wild mustard or wild radish, sometimes people call it as well. And that's actually this plant down here, which you've probably walked past on the pavement many times. Believe it or not, it is edible. Not very tasty though. But this is the humble weedy plant that has become kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, collies, broccolis, and kale, just by selecting for slightly different parts of the plant. And of course, selecting for things that are tasty, tender, edible, like delicious, and so forth. So what that means for us in the home garden is that we could actually have this wild broccoli, wild radish, wild mustard plant pollinating some of our vegetables in the garden. And we might end up with bitter, small, and just not very tender versions of these vegetables when we save seed. The other problem with this group is that it's starting to get quite outbreeding. And up until now, we've been dealing with inbreeding and lightly outbreeding plants. So we can get away with small numbers of them flowering together, or even sometimes just one, and still have good seed over many, many years. But when we get to the Brassica family, it just needs, they say sort of around 20 or 30 of these plants flowering together to keep that gene pool going over the long haul. And that's of course quite difficult in a home garden. So I'm not saying don't save seed, and I've been given seed from this group from home gardeners and it's been really good. But just know that if you are saving seed from these groups, if you notice the decline in vigour and in quality, then it may be just this issue of not having enough genetic diversity in your home garden. Being able to control pollination can be tricky in the home garden, especially when you need those numbers. So you may get some things crossing in that you hadn't expected. And this is what these seed pods look like when they flower and then go to seed. They look like little bean pods. They're not technically called pods. I think they're called racemes. But that's what a Brassica seed pod will look like. Okay, so what do we do with all of those groups that I just talked about? Well, when we're sure that the seed is mature enough, when we can feel it, when we pinch it and we can feel it's gone hard, when the stems are starting to yellow, then we can cut it and harvest it, and we want to dry it out so that we can separate it and deal with it. So I tend to have lots of bunches of this stuff hanging around under cover. Ideally, you wouldn't have too much direct sun because that can really heat up the seed and destroy its viability. So yeah, just try and find somewhere that's in the shade and under cover, and hang them up for a couple of weeks until they're really crispy dry and they start to shatter. So here I've got some coriander, I've got some parsley, and behind them I've got some mustards and some watercress and mizuna, some Brassica family as well. It is a really good idea to label these with tags if you're not totally sure if you're saving multiple types in the same family group, because it's quite hard to tell them apart. There's a question here, is seed colour an indication of readiness? And there's one photo where they turn darker in colour. It is definitely an indication of readiness, but it will vary. What seed colour is ready depends on the specific variety, so it's difficult to give you any useful rules of thumb around that. But as you get more experienced, you'll know, oh yes, that seed is too light or too soft or not big enough, and so it's definitely not ready, and you'll be able to learn that knowledge for each specific group over time. Okay, so now we've got these dried seeds that have been hanging up, or perhaps for some things they've just been sitting in a bowl on our kitchen bench. So I've got some examples here of what to do with them. And these are some marigold seeds. And for these, it's just as simple as shelling them out of the out of the plant. So these are the seeds there. So that's very simple, very, very easy. For some of these, we might need to use a sieve. So I know you probably don't need to see me sieving, but just because I can, I'm processing some amaranth seed here, and I'm always looking in op shops for different gauges of sieve so that I've got lots of options, because each seed will need a slightly different gauge to separate it. The chaff, by the way, the chaff is the seed, or the material that's not seed. So it's bits of podge, sort of husk, all those sorts of things. Technically, you don't have to remove the chaff, but by taking it away, you're compressing the volume that you need to store, which is helpful. And also sometimes chaff can have pests and diseases in it that we'd prefer not to reseed into the garden the following year. So it is like generally good practice to try and remove the chaff, but if you're in a hurry, then you can get away with it if you need to. So here you can see I'm sieving out the amaranth seed. And then if I fast forward to the end, I'm actually just blowing away some of that chaff just to clean it up a little bit more. And there is actually a more fancy version of blowing away chaff that we call winnowing. So here I've got some, and this works very well with most brassica seeds, so broccolis, kales, mustards. I've got my friend Grace here, and she's just helping me strip off the seed from some of the brassica racemes. And so it's actually easy to do this on a big sheet and then tip the sheet into a bowl, but you can imagine just running your hands down to kind of strip off the seed, and also rubbing your hands together around to shatter any of those little pods and release the seed. And then what we do is this process called winnowing. I'll just play you this video so you can see me doing it. This is an ancient technique for separating off the chaff. So I'm shaking there just to bring the chaff to the surface because it's lighter, and I'll grab off handfuls of it if I can. Yeah, so what I'm doing now, I'll just keep doing that again and again, and you'll find you can clean seed quite quickly using that method. So it's just shake, 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 tilt the bowl a bit away from you, and then blow in a U shape around the bowl. And you will actually lose a little bit of seed doing that. But you know what's exciting is that the seed that will blow off first is the lightest seed. In other words, the weakest seed. So when we talked about the power of selection before, you're actually doing that. You're kind of filtering the seed to only the strongest, heaviest, largest seed in the bottom. And there's a question here about whether we freeze all these seeds, or do you just need to do that with beans? Well, it depends on the pests in your garden. And for me, the beans are the only ones that require it, but you can actually freeze any vegetable seeds once they're properly dried. And if you do have concerns about pests, or pests find your seed box, as happened to me this year, then you can just bundle the whole thing up and stick it in the freezer, tightly sealed, and that will process it as well. All right, just a couple more I wanted to cover with you. One is the cucurbitaceae family, or the pumpkin family, which also includes things like cucumbers and zucchinis as well. And with this group, it's particularly important to note that we usually harvest them immature. So this zucchini here, for example, has no viable seed in it yet, way, way too young to get any seed from. This pumpkin, or this is a tromboncino here, and this pumpkin over here, they've got the mature seed. So they will be the ones that come up in your compost heap, not zucchinis, because we eat zucchinis far too young for any viable seed. And for this family, as I mentioned, they have male and female flowers on the same plant, and all of them have this same pattern. So the males have got a little stem like this, and the female flowers have got a little teeny tiny little mini version of the vegetable that we're going to harvest. So this is a cucumber, for example, here. And I always just love looking at the little mini versions. So if we wanted to hand pollinate, we'd get our finger or a paintbrush and we just dab it in the male flower, and then we'd find females and we'd dab it in there. And if we want to actually control the pollination and make sure that we're not creating random butternut pumpkins from different varieties crossing, what we'd actually do, and going back to your question earlier, Darrell, is we would learn when the flowers are going to open the next day. So this is actually pretty straightforward. When they start to look like this and the yellow emerges, we know they're going to open the next day. So what we do is tape them up like this so that no bees or other insects can get in there before us. And then the next day we take out the male and we rip off all the petals, or we get a paintbrush and we dab it into the female. And then we'd actually tape this female flower up after us as well to make sure that insects don't come after us. And we would, at that point, we would also just tie a ribbon or put a flag in the ground or do something to label the flower that's been hand pollinated so that we know that that's the one that we're going to take seed from at the end of the season, because that flower, of course, is going to drop off and then the pumpkin or whatever is going to grow. So we just want to label, and we won't forget which one is the one that we've done the treatment on. So it's actually quite an easy way that you can have pure seed processes at home. And just out of interest, because there's a lot going on in this photo and people sometimes enjoy just reading zucchinis, have a look and see if you can identify the male and the female flowers in this picture, and have a look and see if you can tell what's actually going on with some of the fruits or the zucchinis. There's all the things represented here. So firstly, we've got male flowers. I'll highlight them with my mouse. These ones on long stems here. Then we've got the female flowers, which have got the little immature zucchini. So there's one there and there's one there. And of course, these ones here would have all been female flowers as well. Over here, we've got one that's been pollinated normally. So that's developing into a normal zucchini. Over here, we've got one where the flower has just died off. So we don't actually know what's happened to that one yet. It's very young. This one here has not been pollinated. So if you've ever seen your zucchinis to start to rot out at the flower end and also sometimes get a swelling at the base, that means that there weren't enough bees around, or the bees couldn't see your flowers, so that the leaves were hiding the flowers or something like that. So yeah, that's what it means when you've got different things going on in your zucchini. For this group and for some other things, I mentioned tomatoes before and passion fruits, instead of dry cleaning the seeds, because they're all actually coming to us in a kind of wet form, we can do something called wet cleaning. And you don't really need to see me doing all of this, so I'm just going to fast forward it. But what I'm doing is just picking out as much of the flesh as I can, washing the flesh off them, using a sieve to kind of scrub them a bit, like I was talking about doing with the tomatoes before. And then eventually, once I'm happy with them, I'll just leave them in that sieve to dry. So they've got nice airflow in there as well. Question here about should you cut back the leaves? I think that's for the zucchini. I do cut them back a little bit, also to try and minimize powdery mildew, which happens to all the zucchinis eventually. Just letting sunshine through, letting air through, and also just showing the bees where the flowers are means that you can get good pollination happening as well. So I do tend to trim back leaves when they get a bit big for all of those reasons. Cool, and the last family I'm going to talk you through today is the Poaceae family, which is the corn and the grasses. So corn and maize are the main sort of food crops in this family. Also, grass seeds have a long history of food use by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, and they would also fall into this category as well. Now, this is an extremely outbreeding family, as we mentioned before. So you need lots of them going to seed together if you want to maintain these varieties over time. And they're also wind pollinated. So This is some wind in a community garden here. And we do need a big block of corn, otherwise the pollen just gets blown away and it never makes it onto these silks. So these silks you might be familiar with from eating corn. Each of these threads is connected to a single kernel of corn, which I always just find quite amazing. So all of them need to have a grain of pollen settle on them in order to develop the kernel inside the corn cob, which is just amazing. So you can actually hand pollinate them, but it's a bit of a fuss. And if you get a corn cob that just doesn't fill out with kernels, then that's a pollination problem usually. So you just make sure that there's enough corn and that they're planted in a block, not a line, and the wind is actually able to tumble that pollen all around. Let's see if I've got more pictures. No, just a bit of a choppy video for you. When they dry off, that means that, yeah, the pollination is over. So yeah, that's done. So here's an example. I hand pollinated some corn. I got a good result. Here's one where it just didn't get pollinated very well. And for this family, it's actually as simple as just pulling back the husk, and you can just tie it up and let it dry. And they look beautiful and decorative at the same time as well. All right, so I can see a question. I'm just going to leave that one until the end and we'll come back to that, Robin, if that's okay. We're going to talk about storing all of your seed, and these are the same sorts of rules for all types of seed. The basic mantra for you is cool and dark and dry. Seeds really don't like the temperature or the humidity fluctuating and going up and down. And they also really don't like direct sunlight, not so much because of the UV, but because the sun hitting them will heat them up. And they really do need to stay cool if they're going to stay viable for a long time. So think about where in your house might be the best place to store your seeds. And as a bit of a hint, it usually won't be in your garden shed, and it usually won't be in your greenhouse, which are two very common places that I've seen people store their seeds. So for me, it's actually either under my bed or in the front room of my house, which is on the south side, which tends to stay cooler than the rest of the house. So yeah, think about those conditions. Now you can put them in all kinds of things, but one of the key rules is also you want to keep it as sealed as possible against pests. And this could be rodents, or it could be weevils, or it could be those grain moths that you might have in your pantry. So just try and have a nice tightly sealed container against them. There's a question here, could you vacuum pack seeds and keep them in the pantry? Well, that's a really good question. I've never been asked about vacuum packing before, but they're actually alive, and they probably do need some oxygen to keep them going when they're in the dormant phase. So I'm not actually sure whether vacuum packing would be a good idea. If you want them to store a long time though, you could actually keep your whole box in the freezer, and I know some people that do that, and that will massively extend their lifespan as well. But if you're going to be taking them out all the time, then yeah, the fluctuation in temperature wouldn't be very helpful. So yeah, sorry, I'm not sure about vacuum packing. My instinct says maybe no. And if your pantry is nice and cool and dark, that might be a really good place for them, just depending on your conditions in there. There's a question here about the lifespan. Now, this really depends on the type of seed. So I could only give you an average, and it is very much an average. Most common vegetable seeds, you've got about 3 or 4 years, but that could be as small as 1 year. Things like corn really have to be planted quite fresh, and also passion fruit as well. And then we've got some vegetable seeds that, you know, we're looking at sort of 6-10 years, you know, significantly longer than that. And this is the sort of thing that you just need to look up on the internet or in a good seed reference book. And I've got my favourite one for you coming in just a minute. And Helen's saying she planted some radish from 2012 and some sprouted. Yeah, so there's some very big exceptions to that. But as an absolute average, about 3 or 4 years is common for a lot of vegetables. And of course, some of them are still going to grow. It's just that the percentage of them that grow and the percentage that grows strongly just starts to go down and down and down. So there is a difference between sprouting and also, or actually getting a really good crop from them at the end as well. And with freezing, Tia, look, I don't know the long-term limit of freezing, but I'd say very comfortably, you know, a seed that might last 3 years would last 10 years in the freezer. So it's gonna be really well extended, and a really good strategy for small gardens. If you can't save seed every year from every plant, you could save it in a very long-term way by freezing it as well. So yeah, you can use all different kinds of containers within your sealed box. Glass is fine, reused Ziploc plastic bags, or you know, food packaging, paper is fine. It's all fine. It's just a question of how much space it takes up. So I tend not to do glass jars for the most part. And also people often ask, can I reuse the desiccants that I get in commercial products to keep my seeds nice and dry? And the answer is yes, and it's probably a really good use for them. But you do need to re-dry them every year, because they do their job and then they stop working. So every winter I'll take them all out of the seed box, I'll put them in a warm space around the heater at home, let them dry out for a few days, and then I'll pop them back in the seed box to do their job for another year. Oh, and here's just a friendly reminder of what we're trying to protect against. These are some of the bean weevils. I actually caught this one hatching, which was pretty amazing. So this is what happens if I don't freeze my bean seed, and I get all these little pop marks of hatch holes coming out of them. So yes, must remember to freeze bean seeds. That's what they look like. And then the other type of pest that's really common is these pesky grain moths. That go for things, and they often come in through your pantry and sort of slightly stale products that didn't get eaten in time, and then they will find your seed box and infest it if you're not careful as well. Okay, coming towards the end now, and I want to talk about sharing your seeds, because obviously you're going to have great success and you'll have far too many seeds for your home garden. So what are we going to do with them? And of course, I'm going to point you back towards the seed libraries that Enliven has set up that you can access now through the program. There's an example here of Castlemaine Seed Library. There's also this slightly different system that I came across in the Blue Mountains, where the local seed saving group has got a box of their seeds for sale in the local food co-op, and they massively undercut the commercial seeds that you can see here. So their seeds are about $1 a packet. And they've also got a spiel about their group up here and an invitation for people to come back and join them and share seeds that they've grown. So it's just a nice way of getting seeds out in a different way and encouraging people to find them who might not find the seed library. And I'm going to end with an invitation for you to pick one seed variety and stand by it. Because as I kind of hinted at the start, we are at risk of losing a lot of the diversity, the agricultural biodiversity that has been built up over thousands of years by home gardeners and by small farmers around the world. And if all of us home gardeners just pick one food plant, and we make sure that lives beyond us and gets handed on to another younger gardener when we're older, then we'll be okay. And as a beautiful example of that, my friend Piwei has her variety, which is glass gem corn, this incredibly striking corn over here. And I have a rattlesnake bean, which is my chosen variety that I hand on freely to anyone who asks. Piwei, though, has taken it to the next level. Her seeds come beautifully packaged. They come with inspirational quotes. They come with a Facebook group. They come with a letter explaining the history of the seed, and they come with recipes as well for what to do with them. It really is next level, and it's very beautiful. And one day I'll get there with my rattlesnake beans as well. And I just wanted to give you this as an example of how you can be a bit of a seed champion and stand by your seed. And of course, you can be the one that restocks the seed library every year with whatever variety you have chosen to save at home. So just finally coming to an end, if you've enjoyed today and you'd like to learn a bit more, also if you want to look up particular varieties and their lifespan and some of their little quirks and characteristics, these are the books that I turn to first. The one on the left is the Seed Savers Handbook by Michelle and Jude Fanton, who are the originators of the Seed Savers Network in Australia. Amazing people. This is a great guide, and it's an Australian guide, so of course I'm going to mention it. But I also need to mention this one, Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth. which I must say is a slightly more detailed reference book, and probably the one I turn to first. And this one is written for North American gardeners, but of course we're growing mostly the same sorts of plants, so it's very relevant for us in Australia as well. And finally, if you're just interested in the science and the biology of the way that plants breed and how we can get involved in breeding them, then this book over here, Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties, is a fantastic reference book and has a lot more of that technical information on how to do seed saving and also plant breeding at home. So they're the books that I love. I'm going to finish up there and then we'll go to some questions. And I'll just leave you, because this is of course an online session, just leave you with a couple of things that you might like to try at home quite quickly to reinforce the learning and to start practicing the new skills that you've got. So firstly, have a wander around your garden, your pot plants, whatever you've got growing, and start thinking about selection and which are the strongest ones, the best tasting, the most disease resistant, so you can keep the best and eat the rest. Of course, I'm going to encourage you to have a go at saving seed. And for people just getting started, these are some easy ones to start with: beans, tomatoes, capsicums, chilies, parsley. You can use the dry cleaning methods we talked about for beans, capsicums, chilies, parsley. You can have a go at the wet cleaning methods, the fermenting methods even for the tomato. These crops are pretty straightforward and they're not going to let you down. And finally, when you finish up today's session, I challenge you to walk around your home and figure out the best place to store your seeds, even if it's somewhere a little bit unconventional, like under your bed or in your guest room. Look for somewhere that's cool and dark and dry to make sure that you can get the most out of your seeds and look after them while they're having a sleep and until you're ready to wake them up again in the garden. And that, I think, brings me to the end, right on time, hopefully. So I thank you for listening in today and for your questions. And I believe, Tia, there's now a little bit of time for questions before we finish the session.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks to those who've been popping questions in the chat as we go along. Kat, that was fascinating. Thank you very much. I learned so much. So we've got a question here that's just popped up from Helen. Is it true some apples, etc., may not fruit if store-bought? Is that because they've been irradiated?
Yeah, so I think that's a question about whether the seed is viable, Helen. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if we planted the seed from that apple, would it actually grow? Yeah. Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. A lot of produce which is imported into Australia gets treated in such a way that it can't grow. I believe garlic's a good example of that as well. It gets treated with methyl bromide, so it won't sort of sprout and grow easily. Look, I don't know for sure, Helen, is the answer, so I probably shouldn't speculate, but you could give it a go and see what happens. Apples, just incidentally, apples are very outbreeding. They love cross-pollination. It's partly why there's just so many varieties of them, is they've wildly crossed out there, and people have discovered all these mutations and crosses and kept them going as some of the treasured apple varieties that we've got. So what I can say about apples as a side note is that if you plant the seed, you almost certainly won't get something that's identical to what you were actually eating. So you could discover a new variety, and you could name it Helen's Red or something much more creative. So it's worth playing around and seeing what happens. But I couldn't specifically say whether or not the seed would grow. And if I just scroll back up again, I got a direct question from Robin. She said she's got a hybrid cucumber that she got from a nursery. What would happen if you save seed from that? So again, just reminding everyone, if you joined in late, hybrid seed is seed that has been crossed from two parent varieties to give characteristics from each one that are desirable. If it's done commercially, they're desirable. You could also get them, by the way, from just insects or you crossing things out in the garden. You could get a hybrid seed that way as well. But yeah, so commercial one from a nursery, if you save seed from it, you may get something that's like the cucumbers that you're growing this year. You might get one of the parent varieties popping up. You don't know what they were. You might get another cross completely, because once again, hybrids are unstable. They're genetically unstable varieties. And it would take, actually, Robin, someone like you growing that seed for about 7 years. I've read anyway. And every year you only save seed from the ones that look like what you want. And then eventually, by going through that process, you would create an open pollinated cucumber, if that makes sense. So you can turn a hybrid into an open pollinated cucumber by just rigorously roguing out all the ones you don't want and saving the seeds from the ones that you want. So yeah, it's a bit of a process, Robin. I don't know how big your garden is, how long your patience lasts, but you could save seed from that one if you wanted to over time and stabilize it. I can't answer what would happen if you save seed from it, because you could get all kinds of random mixes popping up. And she says, thanks, not that big. Okay. Are there any other questions out there, Tia or Caitlin?
I haven't received any. Caitlin, have you? I did want to remind everyone that so much great information in this webinar, and it will be recorded, and the recording will be available, so you'll be able to access that, to refer back to all of this wonderful information that Kat shared today. Kat, I also wanted to ask, we'll be sending out an email to the participants afterwards, and wondered the books, the references that you mentioned. Are you happy to for us to include those and share with the participants?
Of course. And I actually have some notes for you as well, which I forgot to mention. So I will send them through, and you can access them as well.
Great. So we're happy to distribute all that information to everyone afterwards. We've got from Robin, thank you to Kat and the Enliven team. Thank you for coming.
There is a question here about where to get heirloom seeds from in Melbourne. Yeah, so, well, I should firstly say, from your neighbours, your gardening neighbours, your friends, your family, local seed libraries and local seed saving networks. Just do a search, ask around, pop your head over the fence. Those are some of your richest and best sources. But of course, we do have some fantastic small commercial seed saving companies. And this, look, I don't want to leave any of them out, but look, the Diggers Club is one of the biggest ones and the most well-known ones. We also have places like Green Patch up in Queensland. We've got Eden Seeds. We've got the Lost Seed down in Tassie. Gosh, so many. The Seed Collection as well. If you've got other sources, pop them in the chat window, because there are just so many of them out there. Mostly these days, they've got online stores. So if you search Heirloom Seeds Melbourne or Heirloom Seeds Australia or Victoria, then hopefully you'll come up with a long list. But always go to your local connections, local community first, because they'll be the ones that are most adapted for your own microclimate in your local area.
Thank you. So I've got our session in till 2:30 in my calendar. Is that accurate, or are we meant to end at 2:15?
Yeah, we have until 2:30 if there are questions.
Great, great. So I do want to just mention there's a QR code on your screen. We're really, really keen to get feedback from everyone on these sessions. Caitlin has just popped a link into the chat, so you can follow that link, scan the QR code with your phone, like for those who might be in the libraries today. And we would really love to hear how you found the session and how we might be able to improve these sessions. This is the first of 5 webinars in this Food from Home series. So we'll really be happy to take any suggestions on board for the future ones. And the information for those will be sent out to you as well. I see from Kat, yeah, happy to wrap up if there are no further questions. Does anyone want to take themselves off mute to ask any questions or pop anything into the chat? Oh, thanks, Melanie. Thanks for coming. What a great comment, Melanie, that you feel much more confident about saving your own seeds in the near future. That's great to hear.
Thanks, Melanie. That was one of my goals. So I feel very happy that one person has had that. If anyone wants to, as they're leaving, just pop in the chat window what they're going to go and do and save seeds from in the future, that would be a lovely thing for me to know. And of course, welcome any feedback that comes through on things to do differently or better next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much for coming, everyone. Happy to wrap up. Parsley from Robin. All right, I think we have got the chats that we're going to get, and happy to say thanks again, Kat. Thanks again, everyone, for coming, and hope to see you in the rest of the webinar series. Have a lovely day.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck out there. Take care.